What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the 2020 World Series champions. My name is Jeff Spiegel. I am joined by Daniel Starkin. And, here we are, Monday night, Daniel. I have a feeling you want to talk about an unbelievable basketball performance. And so I'll give you a minute. I mean, Jimmer Fredette, 70 points, 8 boards, and 9 assists in China the other night. Are you kidding me with that?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you score, 24 more points than LeBron James in a basketball game, it's hard not to be impressed. No, but yeah, I just got done watching that Laker game. What LeBron did was incredible. I got to go back and watch the film on the
Yeah.
Jimmer game, but 70 points, that's a lot too. But yeah, happy Monday. Ready to talk some Dodgers.
I mean, 8 boards and 9 assists. How often do you see a guy drop 70 and almost go for a triple double?
I can't say I've ever seen that.
There you go. He had 4 steals and 2 blocks for those wondering as well. This is in China. No scouting reports from me. But here we are, Dodger Heads Live, another Monday. Unfortunately, another Monday in which not a whole lot has happened on the Dodger front. But we're surviving. Gage, we see you on YouTube. You've been waiting all week for this. We appreciate that. It's going to be a good one tonight, despite the fact that no action has happened. And Daniel, I guess we'll start there. I mean, are you holding up okay with no Dodger news?
I'm still waiting. I'd like to have some actual concrete. And I mean, spring training is getting closer. We don't exactly know when it is. I'm sure we'll get into some of that stuff later, the negotiations and stuff that are going on. But yeah, I'm just waiting for the Dodgers to do something. As of now, if a ground ball's hit to third base, there's really no one there to pick it up. Yeah. So we'll see. Hopefully something happens soon here, and we could have some actual news signings to talk about.
Yeah, well, I kept having this feeling something was going to happen this week, like tonight. I was like checking my phone right before. I was like, this feels like we're maybe due for a trade or something. So we'll see. Stompy Joe, we see bullpen arms getting scarce. We're going to talk about all of it. So here's the plan for tonight. We're going to start with the big rumor, the hot, juicy rumor of the week, which is Trevor Bauer and the Dodgers being connected, Jeff Passan. So we'll dive in there a little bit. Somebody we've talked about in passing, but we've never kind of honed in on. So we'll talk Trevor Bauer there. Then we'll talk about some other names that were connected with the Dodgers who have signed elsewhere, including Kike Hernandez. So we'll kind of talk through that and where the Dodgers go next. Maybe share a couple Kike Hernandez memories. And then lastly, some news this morning about spring training in the Cactus League possibly being delayed. Those reports got more and more complicated as the day went on, but we'll see what happens on that front. But we'll start with the headline. Jeff Passan reporting last week the Dodgers could be a player on Trevor Bauer. They were monitoring his market, were the words that Passan used. And they said for the right price, the Dodgers might be interested. Not necessarily breaking news there, but when Passan says something like that this late in the offseason, it means something. It carries some weight. So I guess I'll phrase my question like this. Bauer is unquestionably the best pitcher on the market. He's also a complicated personality, unquestionably. Yeah. So I'll start with the talent piece first, Daniel. How good, in your estimation, is Trevor Bauer? Are we talking about a top 10 pitcher? Are we talking about a top 25 pitcher? It's easy to look at him and say, he's the best in the market. There's nobody close. That's true. But how good is he? I mean, is this a Jacob deGrom type arm? Is this sort of a second tier number one starter guy?
Yeah, I feel it's kind of hard to say because numbers have been just sound and inconsistent throughout his career. But there's no denying the season he's coming off of. He won the Cy Young. He was incredible for the Reds. I know the Central Division, he wasn't facing the strongest lineups in baseball, but I mean, he still went out there and pitched, really well. Like you mentioned, Jacob deGrom, he had better numbers than deGrom in 2020. And like I said, the Central thing, but we also saw him in the playoffs against the Atlanta Braves, who had a really good offense, and he shut him down for 8 innings. So this is a guy, for me, he's a difference maker. I know the Dodgers don't exactly need a starting pitcher. Like if they go into the season with the guys they have now, that's more than good enough to compete. But when you have a chance to add a guy of his caliber and you could stick him at the top of your rotation and it's on a short-term deal, which is what the Dodgers would be interested in. I don't know how interested in that Bauer would be, but if you could, add that and find a way to make it work for a year or two, I think that would be a huge addition. That would unquestionably give the Dodgers the best rotation in baseball.
Yeah, yeah, it's complicated when I ask the question of top 10 or top 25 because,
Yeah,
as you said, it's been a roller coaster, right? So, this is a guy who
yeah,
debuted in 2012, former number 3 overall pick. Since 2012, he has had exactly 2 seasons with an ERA under 4.15. 2 seasons since 2012 with an ERA under
yeah.
4.15. That's 2018 and 2020, and one of those two was just 75 innings. According to his FIP, that's about right. We're not talking about a guy who's gotten incredibly unlucky. 2020 fourth in WAR, 2018 sixth in WAR, 2019 he was 34th, 2017 he was 28th. So he's got 2 seasons as a 25 to 35 pitcher and 2 seasons as a top 10 pitcher. He's 30 years old, like I said, number 3 overall pick, so the pedigree is there. He's just confusing to me. He's definitely going to get paid like he's a top 10 pitcher, but I'm not sure that he
Yeah.
should. Paul Rubio in the chat says 3 years, 81 million. I mean, it's going to be a lot higher than that. We're talking about a guy that's going to be minimum, I think, $30 million a year, especially if it's on a short-term contract. There's some people that think he might get close to 40 if it were on like a 1 or 2 year deal. So he's a fascinating guy. I just don't, I think he's really good, but I just am under the impression, again, we're just talking talent now. I'm not totally convinced he's a top 10 pitcher and he's about to get paid like he is.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an argument that he's not a top 10 pitcher just because I feel like for the most part, to be a top 10 guy, you got to be
Yeah,
consistent doing it year in and year out. Like you see DeGrom do, like you see Scherzer do, like you see Kershaw do, those type of guys. I wouldn't put him in that category, but at his peak, he's absolutely in that
totally.
category. And if you're the Dodgers, I mean, that's what you'd be hoping for if you bring him in. And as far as work ethic goes, he works as hard as anyone in baseball. I know I follow a lot of his YouTube stuff that he does. He chronicles all his workouts and stuff. It's pretty cool to watch if you're a baseball nerd like myself. But I so for me, the work ethic is enough to kind of buy into the breakout season he had in 2020. Like he's going to do everything in his power to replicate that and maybe even get any better. Obviously, we don't know if the results will be the same.
Yeah.
And if you're paying a guy, 30, 35 million a year, you want ace results. But even if he came to the Dodgers, they got such a good rotation that there wouldn't be any sort of pressure on him to go out and perform. I feel like he would be able to just kind of relax and do his thing. So that would be good. But yeah, you're at 100% right. I have trouble calling him a top 10 guy just because year in and year out, you really don't know what you're going to get out of him.
Yeah, and even just looking, like I say, top 10, he's been fourth and sixth in the last 3 years in WAR. I mean, here are some other guys that have top 10 WAR performances. Lance Lynn has had a top 10 finish this past year.
Our guy.
Dinelson Lamet, Herman Marquez, Kenta Maeda, Brandon Woodruff. I mean, there are guys that sort of have these,
Yeah.
Charlie Morton. There are guys that have these pop-up seasons that pop up as a top 10. Now, he's done it twice. He's got a Cy Young. And like you said, it seems to be something there, the way he spins a baseball, how hard he can throw a baseball, etc. But it's just a fascinating guy to talk about. And that's all without even discussing the off the field stuff, because the flip side to all of this is he's a complicated person. He's got some detractors on social media who would tell you that he's as bad of a person as exists, short of like people that deserve to be locked up. Some of the more famous examples, he had a back and forth with a college student on Twitter that ended with him tweeting at or about her 17 times. A bunch of his followers ended up abusing her. It wasn't him, but he's dabbled in some pretty fringy conspiracy theories, that kind of thing. We're not talking about Aubrey Huff, okay? But we aren't talking about Clayton Kershaw either. He's closer to Aubrey Huff than he is to Clayton Kershaw, I think.
Yeah.
And on a team where, like the Dodgers, that have always valued clubhouse culture, Bauer was well liked in Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Arizona, not really so much. So how do you navigate that? We just talked, okay, he's a top 10 pitcher. Top 10 pitcher, the Dodgers that's somebody that the Dodgers should go get. They should pay up for him. The off the field stuff, does that impact things for you?
Yeah, as someone who grew up in Southern California playing baseball, I've known I don't know him personally, but I've known who he is since he was in high school at Hart High, and he's just always been a weird guy, kind of. I don't want to say loner, but he never really had a bunch of friends growing up, so I think that kind of contributed to just the weirdness that he is now. And I've seen the social media stuff. It's not great. I'm not one to judge someone based off a few social media posts. But for anyone who doesn't like the guy because of that stuff, you're more than warranted to feel
Yeah.
that way. Like there's some bad stuff for sure. But like I said earlier, I watch a lot of his YouTube stuff, and from what I've seen, I mean, obviously he controls what he puts on there, so he doesn't want to make himself look bad. But just his normal interactions with people, like he seems like a decent human being. Like he's not a monster.
Yeah.
Like he's not Aubrey Huff, like you said. But it definitely is cause for concern, especially in a Dodgers clubhouse that has a lot of guys. It's a tight knit unit. They're more quiet guys, I'd say. A lot of the outspoken guys they've had over the years maybe didn't work out and are now in other places. So it's definitely when you're going to be handing a guy, I don't know if it's a 1-2 year deal, but you're handing them, 30, 35 million a
Yeah.
year. That's definitely something you have to consider because you're a big time organization. You're in the public eye. You don't want this guy, bringing you any unnecessary drama that when you already have a good enough team to win without
Yeah.
him. So before you sign him, those are all things to consider. With that being said, for me personally, I wouldn't let that take away from if you think he's going to be an ace for the next couple years. For me, I still think you got to sign him. From the YouTube stuff I've seen, like his vlogs last year just showed him like interacting with his teammates, and they all love him. Like he was hanging out with them off the field and stuff, which obviously if you don't like a guy, you don't
Yeah.
have to do that type of stuff. So I think the clubhouse stuff may be a bit overblown. I don't think he's like a clubhouse cancer by any means, but he kind of does like to do his own thing sometimes. So those are all factors you have to consider before handing a guy, a big time check like
Yeah,
that.
and as you said, I mean, Cincinnati, the reports there were positive. Daniel Mueller asks on Periscope, do you think he can destroy the chemistry? I mean, there is a Driveline connection. The Dodgers are plugged into Driveline. They've got some
Yeah.
folks from Driveline. So, there's probably some familiarity there, some people he would connect with. But yeah, to your point, I mean, he doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to buddy up with, Clayton Kershaw or even Walker Buehler necessarily, just from a personality perspective. And I mean, Justin Turner is a free agent, and he's kind of one of the clubhouse leaders. Mookie Betts,
Definitely.
David Price are guys that are going to step into that role. But to potentially lose out on Turner and then add a guy like Bauer, it would definitely make things fascinating. As far as we've got some questions, Paul Rubio Jr. says, would the Dodgers look at someone like Tanaka as a pitching option? If you saw the show that I had earlier this week, we had Jay Jaffe on the show from Fangraphs. It was great having him on. And Tanaka's a guy that he likes sort of as an under the radar free agent. But we both mentioned, I mean, the Dodgers are not looking for innings. They're not looking for just anybody on the starting rotation. I mean, Bauer is the only starting pitcher that the Dodgers would touch with a 10-foot pole with any sort of intention to immediately insert this person into the rotation. I've mentioned Chris Archer as a guy that I like, but that would be as a depth piece, as a bullpen piece, not as like, hey, Chris, come be our fourth starter. So with Bauer, it's so fascinating. I go back and forth. I mean, the money's not mine, so who cares if they spend it? Obviously, he makes them better as a pitcher. Even if he is a top 25 pitcher and you're overpaying for that, I mean, that still gives you 3 of the top 25 pitchers in all of baseball in your starting rotation. It's a guy that wants to pitch every 4 days, which even if they don't let him do it, he's durable. He can eat innings. He's an LA guy. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons that make me lean towards let's go for it.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing I will say is that the way the Dodgers, the way their books are looking right now, they don't have a lot of guys signed to long-term money.
Yeah.
So they could afford to do this short-term type of high money deal for Bauer right now because in a couple years he'd be off the books again, and then that's right when Bellinger and Buehler are coming up, so you're getting ready to pay them. Obviously Seager's next year, but you would be able to afford him. Him and Bauer and Mookie would be the 3 big money guys, and then Clayton Kershaw, who's a free agent after this year. I would assume they're going to be bringing him back probably a little cheaper than what he's making now, but still good money.
Yeah.
Still Clayton Kershaw. But I think it works out right now that you could give him that 2-year deal if that's what he even wants. Who knows? And who knows if a team's willing to give him a long-term deal? Because like all the concerns we just laid out, those concerns become more of concerns if he's under contract for 6 years as opposed to 2.
Yeah.
Like if it's only a 2-year deal, if he causes problems in the first year, then you could either trade him or he's only got 1 year left. Like it's not like, oh, we got 5 more years of this guy. Like that's gonna be
Yeah.
awful. Like so, I mean, I think it does make sense, and like you just mentioned, LA's his hometown. It's a chance to compete for a World Series, which I feel like every player wants. So
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense for both sides, I think. I don't really know what other suitors he has. Maybe the Angels probably make sense too. They could
Yeah.
use pitching. But other than that, I don't really think teams are spending big money. So they maybe could even get him like a little cheaper than everyone's thinking.
Yeah, the Mets were a team rumored to be interested, and they have the huge
Yeah.
scandal break literally while we were on streaming last week, and so it's safe to say that Trevor Bauer. I mean, there's all sorts of New York think pieces saying after what you just did, the Mets, like you cannot possibly sign this guy. The last thing you need is questionable stuff. So. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, a couple people in the chat are asking about the Dodgers, and Kevin, you're right. The Dodgers are just under the luxury tax. So basically anybody of note that the Dodgers sign, including Justin Turner, would put them over. So does that mean you just full send and go way over and say it's just 1 year? You know, as you pointed out, I mean, we're 2 years away from Mookie Betts being the only guy under contract. That doesn't include Buehler and Bellinger and guys that would be arbitration eligible, but the Dodgers do have some flexibility going forward, so we'll see. I do think, I mean, a 2-year deal, maybe even a 3-year deal. He's 30 years old. You'd be getting prime years, and it's a guy, like you said, he's committed to being great. He wants to be great. The way he goes about that is different than most people, but the Dodgers have a solid clubhouse, so he'd be coming into a place that's pretty set, pretty stable, got a clear hierarchy as far as power. People respect Roberts, so it's not like he'd be coming into a place that he could just single-handedly blow up. I think he'd have enough people around him to kind of keep him in check. So we'll see. I mean, you know, the personality is different, but let's not pretend. Not everybody on the Dodgers are best friends. Like, you know, I don't think Cody Bellinger and Clayton Kershaw are hanging out on weekends. So it's not like these guys have to be best friends. They just have to respect one another. I mean, even Mookie's a different kind of cat. Like, I mean, he doesn't necessarily fit the stereotype. Kershaw doesn't fit the stereotype. Like, Bellinger probably does. Seager's an old soul. I mean, Bueller's kind of a redneck, like, hunting kind of guy. I mean, it is a wide spectrum of personalities in the Dodger clubhouse. I guess my biggest question is, I'm not sure who the leader is. It's probably Mookie. He seemed to take on a little bit of a leadership role last year, probably more so. Again, David Price would probably walk in there. If Turner is there, I probably feel a lot better about Bauer coming on board.
Yeah. And one last thing I will say on Bauer that's a positive is this guy is so like dedicated to his craft. He was like one of the, you mentioned Driveline a little while ago. He was one of the first guys to start working out with Driveline and all these different type of workouts that you see pitchers doing now. And one thing I've heard from like in videos and stuff from a lot of the coaches in the Reds organization is they all loved having Bauer there because he was basically like having another coach. He's willing to work with minor leaguers, show them the workouts he's doing to increase spin rate and velocity and all that stuff. So that's a good resource to have in your organization, especially for young guys that are still developing. So that's another positive that he brings to the table off the field, in addition to obviously what a great pitcher he is.
Yeah, fair point. So let's shift gears from something the Dodgers might do to something the Dodgers can't do, which is a few guys that they had been connected to but have signed contracts over the last week or so. Brad Hand signs with the Nationals for $10.5 million. Kirby Yates signs with the Blue Jays for $5.5 million. That number seems low. If he makes 35 appearances, it goes up to $8.5 million. If he gets a 70 appearances, I believe it gets all the way up to $10 million. And then Kike Hernandez to Boston for 2 years, $14 million. That was a shockingly high number to me, but just looking at those three contracts, what jumps out to you about Hand, Yates, and Hernandez's numbers?
I mean, Hand got like right around what basically any team in baseball could.
He got more. The Nats could have had him for $500K less.
More, yeah. But so I'm a little surprised that we were surprised at the time, but I'm still surprised the team wouldn't just claim that guy and pay him $10 million. I thought the Dodgers were in on him for a 1-year deal. Reports indicated he wanted multi-years, so I was a little surprised he wound up signing that 1-year deal. But I don't know the exact reason the Dodgers passed, but I guess 1 year, 10.5 million is probably more than
See.
they're looking to spend on a reliever. We heard reports they were in on Yates for 1 year, 5 million. Like you said, he got a little more than that plus some incentives. So maybe those incentives took them out of the running. But I still think the Dodgers are looking for one more reliever, but they're obviously not trying to overpay. So there's a few names out there that I'm sure we'll get into, but that for me, Hand was the best guy out there after Liam Hendricks signed. And Yates, I thought he was a good upside play. He's 1 year removed from being one of the best relievers in baseball. But I mean, there's plenty of options out there, and even if the Dodgers don't add any more relievers,
Yeah.
they still have so much depth there right now. Maybe they lack the one high-end top 10 reliever in baseball. They don't have that, but they got 5 guys who are all plenty capable of being high leverage guys, and even their like lower to mid leverage type guys would be, really good in other places as well. So I think the bullpen as a whole is fine. You could always address that at the deadline if you have to.
Yeah.
And I'm in agreement with you on Kike. That was a little higher than I was expecting. I thought he'd probably only sign for 1 year given the financial landscape of the league right now. But hey, good for him. He found a 2-year deal, $7 million a year, and he's going to get a chance to play second base every day, which is what he wanted. So I'm happy for him. Wish him the best. And but we're okay as far as utility guys go. We got Chris Taylor and McKinstry, so
Yeah.
we'll be all right there. I don't think that's a huge loss.
Now, when you say no top 10 relievers in baseball, you mean outside of Dylan Floro, right? I just wanted to clarify and make sure that you weren't forgetting about Floro.
He's in a class of his own,
okay.
so I didn't think it would be fair to include him.
Yeah, I mean, the Hand contract is a crack up to me. I mean, literally, the Nationals could have signed him 3 or 4 months ago for $500,000 less, and here they are paying him 10. Somebody, I think it was Logan Jones, commented that Hand wanted to be a closer. The Dodgers didn't want to give him that role. I don't know if that's confirmed, but that makes sense. That's the thought I had. Was the Dodgers probably were willing to get close to money, but obviously, if you can go save 40 games for the Nationals, that's going to look a lot better on a resume than putting up the same numbers as kind of a committee guy with the Dodgers. So that makes sense. And I mean, Friedman, there's probably a part of Friedman that's like, we aren't going to pay you more than we could have paid you. The Nationals, it's kind of like they're scrambling. Oh, shoot, we'll just pay you the extra. Friedman's like, look, this is our number. Our number's been the same for the last 3 months. You either take it or you leave it. He left it. Yates, same thing. I mean, the numbers were fine. I liked Yates at $5 million. I mean, 35 appearances, 162 games is not a lot of appearances. That's like missing half of the season. So if you make 35 appearances and get $8.5 million, that's what they're paying Treinen. I'd take Treinen all day just because of the lack of injury history there. And then, Kike Hernandez. I mean, I think he was a guy that was projected to make 2 or 3 or 4, somewhere in that range, maybe for 1 year, maybe 2. And here he is getting 2 years, $14 million. Good for Kike. I can't imagine. The Dodgers had no interest in bringing him back. It wasn't anything personal. It was just a matter of they've got Zach McKinstry, who a lot of people really think is a sleeper, who's basically the exact same as Kike Hernandez, maybe even a tad better offensively, probably offers you less defensively at second base, but maybe more defensively in left field and places like that. And so good for Hernandez, 2 for 14. I mean, when you think about Hernandez, what are the memories this is a guy that is beloved by the Dodgers, and I can't really think of a guy who is as beloved by the Dodgers, but maybe who's like on the field actual performance was as sort of league average as Hernandez's was. I mean, he wasn't an all-time great. He's not going to have his number retired, and yet I think Dodger fans will love him for the entirety of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking personality, there's no one with a better personality in that clubhouse than Kike. He's hilarious. He always knew how to, brighten the mood. Because to be honest, there's so many quiet guys in that Dodgers clubhouse. Like, he was the one guy that stood out, and he was always just so entertaining. And you're right about his on the field play. Like, he was a utility guy, and he filled his role great, but he wasn't some star or anything. And he was a streaky hitter for the most part. So there were times when he was hot, and it would be like, wow, like here he is. Here's the real Kike. He's finally breaking out. And then he'd have like a 1 for 30 slump, and you're like, oh no, he's just that utility guy that he's always been. So there's so many great memories, though, because he came up big in the postseason a lot. Like, the first one that comes to mind, obviously, is what he did this past year in Game 7 of the NLCS. He hit the game-tying home run. That's something I'll never forget. That was huge. And then also the 3 home run game in the
You stole
NLCS
both of
in
mine, Daniel. What's up with that, man?
yeah, whatever year that was. I think it was 2017,
2017,
right? Against the Cubs. That was
Game
I'll
5.
never forget that night because that was the first time I had seen the Dodgers clinch a spot
Yep.
into the World Series. So that was memorable for sure. So yeah, I'm gonna miss Kike. I wish him the best. Yeah, I wish can't say anything bad about
You
the
you
guy.
stole my two. I mean, game tying home run in Game 7 of the NLCS this year. 3 home runs in Game 5 of the NLCS in 2015. I mean, you can't deny the guy just sort of. It was sort of like Jock Peterson in a lot of ways, where the moment was
Yeah.
just never too big for those guys. It wasn't like they didn't have like the all-star pedigree necessarily. I mean, Peterson maybe more so, but they weren't like the best hitter, but you just felt good about them in that spot. Sometimes even
Hmm.
better than a lot of the bigger names on the Dodgers. So those are the two. Kevin Herrera mentions a game-time single off Ken Giles in Game 2 of the World Series in 2017. So there you go. Let's see if anybody else. Anybody else has a Kike Hernandez memory throw. I mean, the big one, Game 7 of the NLCS this year, and 3 home runs. Those were the first two that clicked for me. We got someone in the chat asking, as we're talking about Kike Hernandez, Jock Peterson. I mean, it continues to drag on with Peterson.
Yeah.
My sense is that the Dodgers aren't going to bring him back. I think the Dodgers like the options they have behind the current crop of outfielders. They're probably. But the flip side is, I mean, if they are truly kicking the tires on a guy like Marcell Ozuna and you're planning on the DH, I mean, Peterson probably gives you as much, if not slightly more defensively as Ozuna gives you. Obviously, he's a trusted guy. He's going to be a heck of a lot cheaper than Ozuna, and he's come up with big moments. So while we're talking about Hernandez, I mean, as this drags on, do you still think there's a chance that Jock Peterson comes back?
I mean, I feel like I've been on the only guy on the re-sign Jock train this offseason. And like you said, the longer the offseason drags on, I feel like his options are kind of dwindling. So maybe he comes back to the Dodgers and say, hey, I'll sign for 1 year pretty cheap and we'll run it back one time and then I'll hit the market again next winter. I would love that. I still think as great as AJ Pollock is, and I think he's fine as an everyday left fielder in the regular season, but in the postseason, when there's a tough righty on the mound, I just feel like he doesn't really have a chance. I'd much rather see Jock in there. We know how great Jock has been in the postseason. They call it Jocktober for a reason. So yeah, I would absolutely love one more Jocktober. And I mean, we don't really know what suitors he has. I feel like his name hasn't come up much this offseason. So the one team was the Washington Nationals, but they signed Kyle Schwarber instead, so that they're not too interested anymore. So I don't really know what his options are at the moment, but
Yeah.
I'd love to have him back.
Yeah, he's a fascinating one. I mean, as you said, not a lot of people talking about him. That's what's interesting is any guy who's signed a contract has gotten more than I expected them to get. I mean, that's what's interesting. When Hand got passed on for 10 million, it was like, oh man, this isn't good because this is a guy who's going to be at the top of the market and he can't even get 1 year $10 million. And yet Kike gets more than we thought. Kirby Yates gets more than we thought. Brad Hand gets more than we thought. I mean, go down the list. Just about everybody who has signed a contract already got either projection or higher. So the flip side is there's a lot of guys floating around out there. And a lot of guys with a guy like Jock Peterson, you just assume, well, he'll sign somewhere, But, I mean, at some point, spots start to disappear. I mean, a guy like Yasiel Puig is good enough to be on a major league roster and spent all of last season not on one. Now there was the weird situation where with the Braves where, his COVID testing and whatever. But so it's not it's just not a guarantee. Now for the Dodgers, I mean, I think there's probably a number where they're staying engaged, whereas Kike Hernandez was a much longer shot. I think Jock Peterson is a long shot, but not impossible. I mean, I'm sure they've kept in touch and said, test the market. Here's a number we feel good at. If you can't do better, give us a call, and who knows? I mean, maybe if Justin Turner doesn't end up signing with the Dodgers or they miss out, I mean, the Dodgers are going to want to add a bat at some point. So it might be Jock Peterson. It might be Jock Peterson and somebody else, but that's a great question because I don't think it's a done deal that he won't be back. So along those lines, I mean, let's talk. Hand is off. Yates is off. What do the Dodgers do now? I mean, Justin Turner's the obvious one. We've kind of beat that horse to death, so we'll not talk about Justin Turner. Trevor Rosenthal, probably the best name of the relievers on there. Alex Colomb is somebody that on Twitter we keep getting questions about. I mean, Jake McGee, our guy. Rich Hill, your guy. What do the Dodgers do next? Let's start with the bullpen. The Dodgers have seemed to say that they're not quite finished, but maybe as the top of the market has disappeared, maybe they are. What do you think?
Yeah, I still think they're looking to add one more reliever. I don't think they feel like they have to. Like they've already added a decent amount to their bullpen, this offseason. They with what's his name, Trinan and
Knable.
Morrow and Jimmy Nelson and all those guys, Knable, obviously. So um, and I also heard I forgot who tweeted it, but someone said that Tommy Kahnle was talking about maybe even coming back
At the end of
next
last year,
September, so
yeah.
that they were counting on having him for 2022. But hey, if he comes back in September, maybe that's another weapon to have in the postseason. I wouldn't count on it. He's coming off Tommy John, but you never know. So I think the bullpen's fine, but I do think they're looking to add one more guy if it's cheap enough. Like we know they were interested in Yates on 1 year, 5 million. So maybe they turn
Yeah.
and give that same exact deal to someone else. You just mentioned a lot of the guys. I don't think Colomé an option. He probably wants to close somewhere if he can, and also his peripherals didn't really support his great ERA last year. So I don't really know if he's a guy you want to add for the price it's going to be. But Trevor Rosenthal, I think, would be good. I would love Jake McGee
Yeah.
back. I know they could use another lefty. They
Yeah.
don't have too many lefties. Jeremy Jeffress is another guy that they've been linked to at points this offseason who had a pretty good year with the Cubs last year. So I think there's still some solid options out there that you could have on a 1 year deal. Just depends if they feel they need to give out 5 million for a middle of the pack type reliever.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Here's who the Dodgers have: Kenley Jansen, Blake Trinan, Corey Knable, Brusdar Graterol, Victor Gonzalez, Garrett Clevenger, a guy they acquired via trade, Dylan Floro, Joe Kelly, Adam Kolarek. That's and then you throw in the number 6 starter plus the 5 normal starters. That's 15 arms, which is probably one more than they need. So if you add to that list, now you've got to take 2 names off of that list. You say, oh, well, if you add a lefty, maybe Kolarek is the name that you take off of that list. But then who's the other one? Like, do you want that 6 starter not in the bullpen? Garrett Clevenger, who they've acquired via trade. We don't know a ton about him, but they obviously liked him enough to go out and get him. I'm sure there's a lot of people, myself included, who'd say, hey, Joe Kelly, it's been fun. Thank you for your service. But he still has the potential that you're not going to cut him for nothing. So I like the idea, but at some point, I think if it's not Rosenthal or maybe Jeffress, I just don't know if any of these guys are good enough to justify. I mean, Jake McGee, if you can get him on like a minor league contract or something, maybe. But I didn't even mention Brandon Morrow. I didn't even mention Jimmy Nelson because those are the types of guys that are way on the outside looking in already. So obviously injuries, and obviously you're not assuming all those guys are going to stay healthy, and that there's room to make up, but there's not a whole lot of margin for error. And if you do add a guy like Rosenthal, then you've got some decisions to make at the back half of that bullpen.
Yeah, and I feel like relievers are so volatile that you really don't know what you have in a bullpen. Like on paper, the Dodgers bullpen looks good, but it could happen that they all come out and all do great next year and they have the best bullpen in baseball, or they could, a few of them could be mediocre, a few could be bad, and then maybe they got to get someone at the deadline. So I think Andrew Friedman realizes that. We haven't really seen him either in trades or signings. He never really gives like super long-term deals to relievers just because of the volatility. So I honestly wouldn't be mad if they just go into the season with the bullpen they have now and then assess, when they have to. If injuries happen or if guys aren't as good as you think, then there's always a trade before the deadline that you could go out and to get whatever reliever is pitching well, that year.
Yeah. Yeah, Bradley on YouTube asked, with the Yankees moving Ottavino, do you think the Dodgers try and shed payroll by moving Joe Kelly or something? Here's the one problem with that. Ottavino is good and Joe Kelly is not good. And so, like somebody's willing to pay $7 million for Ottavino because his numbers have been good.
Yeah.
Nobody wants the last year on Joe Kelly's contract.
Yeah, I'm sure if the Dodgers were willing to eat half his salary or something of that nature, they could, give him away. But at this point, why is that even worth it? You might as well just keep him. When Joe Kelly's good, he's actually pretty good. Like it's a non-zero chance that he's actually a contributor this year. So I'm not completely jumping off the Joe Kelly bandwagon, but yeah, I mean, if you could find a similar deal to the Ottavino one, then you absolutely do it.
Yeah. I mean, Ottavino, I saw something. His numbers this year, if you look at his ERA, was rough. And I think it was Jeff Passan pointed out. I mean, or maybe it was Ken Rosenthal. Someone pointed out that he had one game where he gave up 6 runs, and if you take that one off of his performance, his ERA was like 2.9 or something this year. So, We'll see. I mean, it'll be interesting. I think the Dodger bullpen is a strength. I think the Dodgers, as fans, we come at this like we just want to see them do something, and it's so easy to forget where they already are starting from. I mean, it's imagining starting a race, and the Dodgers started a 3-mile race 2 miles ahead of everybody else. So, yes, they've made up 50% of the ground, but the Dodgers remain a mile ahead of everybody else. We just have to keep things in perspective. The Dodger bullpen is very good. The starting rotation is very good. The lineup is very good. We know there's going to be a bat added. I mean, I think everybody can say with almost certainty there will be a bat added. Justin Turner remains the most likely one, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. And if not, the Dodgers will be fine. So let's shift gears to the other major story that kind of came out in baseball world today, which is spring training. This is from an article that was saying, quote, leaders of all 8 Cactus League cities have sent a letter to Major League Baseball saying it would be, quote, wise to delay the start of spring training due to the high COVID-19 rate of infection in Arizona's Maricopa County. Spring training scheduled to begin at the end of February. Dodgers are, of course, one of 15 teams slated to play there. Jeff Passan adds, to be clear, the Cactus League has no authority over spring training starting, but the health and safety issues remain an unanswered question for Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball Players Association, and this is something that is going to need resolution very soon. He also goes on to add that the Arizona Coyotes are currently hosting fans at their games in Arizona. The Phoenix Suns, however, are not. No word on this impacting the regular season, anything like that. My first thought when I thought of this is, as Passan comments that, like, okay, so this is a non-story. They can say all these nice things, but like the odds that this is going to delay the Major League Baseball season keep dreaming. The flip side is, if things slow down a little bit, it feels like it'd be good for the Dodgers, right? It feels like this would be the anti-Lakers situation where the Lakers play all the way through the finals and then it's like 47 days later, they've got to start the NBA season all over again. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but if it does, it feels like a positive for the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, more rest is definitely always good. It does get a little tricky for the pitchers because they're kind of even, starting at the beginning of January, I'd say, is when they really start to ramp up. But they're like building up to be able to start throwing at the beginning of spring training, and then obviously what the target goal is opening day. But so that could get a little tricky, but. Yeah, I mean, when you play until the last game of the season, obviously more rest is going to be beneficial. With that said, I'm not counting on anything being pushed back. If they want to play a full 162 game season, which from all reports we've seen they do, then they would have to start it on time because the TV deals and the money and all that down the line in the postseason and stuff, you can't change any of that. Yeah. So I don't expect spring training to get moved back. It's too much money involved, and like you just said, the Coyotes, they're hosting games with fans, so I don't see how the Cactus League executives or whatever you want to call them, I don't see how they could come out and say this when there's other sports going on. But I mean, they are right. Like, obviously pushing it back another month would only be good for everyone involved. Yeah. That would give more time for the vaccine to get out and stuff, but I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah. I mean, spring training's such a fascinating thing, right? Because it seems meaningless from the outside, but to a sport like baseball, almost more than anything else, it's such a critical time for pitchers to be built up, for hitters to, it's basketball. You could shoot hoops, all season long. Yeah. Football, you could throw a football and run and do all those things, but to actually see live pitching, to actually face live hitting, those are things that just can't be simulated. And for a pitcher, as you said, they've got to build themselves up. And so, yeah, I mean, I love Passan just kind of dropping the hammer where he's like, hey, so just to be clear, like everybody who signed this is completely powerless to do anything about it. And like, there's no way that baseball is like, oh, okay, good point. We'll delay everything 3 weeks. I mean, and obviously this is only half the teams. Half the teams are slated to play in Florida. There's no issue there. So we'll see. I mean, I think this is a blip.
One of the Florida stadiums started selling ticket packages today. That. So yeah, definitely no issues there.
No issues in Florida. Yeah, they're probably like, hey, come on down. Come on down. One other story on baseball, and then we'll get to some mailbag questions. So keep those coming. I know we got a couple on Twitter that we'll get to. Major League Baseball Players Association and the owners are trying to come up with an agreement on the upcoming season. The season's going to happen. It's not a collective bargaining issue, but they are still sort of haggling over the potential for a universal DH, the potential for expanded playoffs. They did not come to an agreement. So as of today, there is no universal DH. There is no expanded playoffs. someone put it best. Owners are trying to get players to give them something, playoff expansion, in exchange for something that everybody wants. It's not like a you
Yeah.
want this and we want that. It's we want both of these things and you want this. So let's just come to an agreement. Most people still seem to think the DH is going to happen. I don't think expanded playoffs are quote unquote likely. They're possible. I hate the idea of expanded playoffs. We talked about it this past season. I like the idea of the universal DH. I know that puts me in the minority, it feels like. But your thoughts on the news that no agreement was reached today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that no agreement was reached after everything we saw, play out last summer. So it wasn't surprising that these two sides couldn't agree. They can't agree on anything. But like you said, the universal DH is something that both sides want, and the expanded postseason is something that the owners want because that's more money for them. So that I feel like they got to give the players something more than just a universal DH if they want to add the expanded postseason. We'll see. They still got time to continue negotiating. We
Yeah.
know they're going to take it down to the final hour if they can, because neither side wants to give in. But I'm holding out hope that there's going to be a universal DH. Not as much because I like it, but just because it benefits the Dodgers so much. Like just being able to rest guys and get them off their feet for a day is so beneficial, especially throughout the course of a 162 game season. So I hope they could find a way to have the universal DH. And I'm with you. I don't like the expanded postseason. I felt like that was a waste of time. We still saw the same teams we were expecting to get through. Like the Dodgers just had to waste their time playing the Brewers a couple times. So I'd rather not see an expanded postseason, or at least give me like maybe what was it? It was 8 teams in each in each league last year. So give me like 6 teams in each league. So it's one added, but the top 2 teams still get like a bye from that wild card round, because if you win 105 games, you should not be forced to play a wild card round against a team who is like below 500. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and I mean the other advantage to the Dodgers with the DH is our 9th best hitter is better than your 9th best hitter.
That's
so
true.
Not only do we have the luxury of resting guys because chances are we're doing so well, that it's like, hey, we can give some of these guys a day off, but it's also like, hey, our 9th and 10th and 11th best hitters are better than most who are barely scraping together 8 quality guys. So
definitely.
Yeah. Well, let's get to some mailbag questions. Throw those in the chat. I saw one. We'll start with this. Chiefs or Bucks, Daniel? Who you got? The spread is Chiefs minus 3.5. So if you want to mess around with the spread, but I think the Chiefs are going to kill them personally. I mean, I've been betting against Tom Brady all year and getting a lot of those bets wrong. But I mean, I thought the Chiefs were going to cruise last week. They did. I don't think anybody's beating the Chiefs.
Yeah, no. If you're asking who I think is going to win, I definitely think it's the Chiefs. They're unreal. Like Mahomes is ridiculous. Tyreek Hill is so fast. Travis Kelce is just always open. Like you can't stop those guys.
Yeah.
I'll be rooting for Tom Brady though. Like for him to be back. I'm not a Raider fan like you, so I haven't had 15 years full of hate built up for Tom Brady.
You are a human being though, so I mean, I don't understand how those two things are compatible. Brady, get out of here.
I will say I don't think I've ever rooted for him in a Super Bowl, but now he's 43, doing it for a 10th time on a new team. I think it'd be cool to see him win one more.
No thanks. I mean, that's the funny thing. As a Raider fan, the Chiefs are in my division. I can't even hate the Chiefs because Mahomes is there. If the Chiefs win, we will point out that the Raiders are the only team to have beaten the Chiefs, like sort of legit. I mean, they lost in week 17, but the Raiders did beat them, so shout out to the Raiders. But screw Brady. We don't need any of that. Noah agrees with me. He used harsher language than I did in the chat. I won't repeat, but I'm with you, Noah. DC had an interesting comment on YouTube, going back to our comment on conversation about the expanded playoffs, saying as a fan, they liked it, but they understand the issues. I mean, I'll say this, like as an NFL fan, I'm like, hey, you had a playoff team? Like, heck yeah, the Raiders have a better chance of getting in, So I find myself very biased based on where my team stands. Like if the expanded playoffs helps me, I like it. If it doesn't help me, I hate it. So I don't know. I'll admit that I'm inconsistent there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, if you were a Brewers fan, you had to at least be stoked your team got to play a couple extra games, even though they lost. But yeah, as a baseball fan, obviously watching more baseball is always fun. Like those wild card rounds, we're waking up at 9 a.m. flipping a game on, and then the last game's going till like 10 p.m. It was definitely fun, and I enjoyed it. But just for the sake of just baseball as a whole, like that's just too many teams for me. You
Yeah.
don't need teams that are below 500 in the postseason.
Yeah, it just, I mean, the gap between the top and the bottom of that group is so massive. I mean,
Yeah.
and you saw it in football. That wasn't the case in football. I mean, the Colts, some of these teams, like the Dolphins, who didn't even make the playoffs, would have been a very competent NFL playoff team. You couldn't have
Yeah.
said the same about the Brewers. And I mean, under 500 teams making it. It was
Yeah.
pathetic. Let's see. Malik asks, expanded playoffs leaves more games to watch as a fan. Universal DH adds more intensity, but I feel it takes away from the originality of the game. Do you feel the same? I mean, there is that unique aspect of baseball is this only sport where one half of the league plays by one set of rules, the other doesn't. There is this tradition of the National League being different. How do you feel? I mean, that to me is the argument. The only argument against it is just the history, the uniqueness, sort of the character that baseball adds. You know, they have unique stadiums. They have some of these things that make every like sort of park different. The DH is kind of like one of those things.
Yeah, I mean, we've been watching National League Baseball our whole lives, so we're used to pitchers hitting and double switches and all that stuff. So when they were first talking about the universal DH last year, I was totally against it. I was like, no, that's not real
Yeah.
baseball. I don't want to see that. But then once it actually happened and I saw the season play out, I loved it. Like I never want to see pitchers hit again, if I'm being, completely honest. Like, so now I'm fully on board with the universal DH. I completely understand why people feel the other way, because like I just said, that was me until about the middle of last season, when I realized that it's so much more fun watching 9 hitters instead of
Edwin Rios hit instead of Walker Buehler.
Yeah, exactly. And 450 feet dongs, then Clayton Kershaw dropping down a sack punt.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, whatever they do this season is whatever, because I feel like next year, once they negotiate the new collective bargaining agreement, the universal DH is going to be in there. So it's just a matter of what happens this season.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, a couple questions we got via Twitter. Was asking about how the Dodgers offense in 2020 stacked up with the Padres. I know they were good, but I don't know if they were as good as us. With their pitching improving, it would be interesting to compare the two offenses. I mean, I could look up the hard numbers. How did you feel like the Dodger offense stacked up against the Padre offense in 2020?
Yeah, I thought they were pretty even, and I looked up the numbers. And the Dodgers were a little bit better. The Dodgers scored the most runs in baseball. The Padres were third. The Dodgers were second in OPS. The Padres were fourth. So both teams were really good. I'd say the Dodgers are a little bit better. I'd say the biggest difference between the two teams is that a lot of the Padres players, I'd say, overachieved. Like you saw guys like Jake Cronenworth, who came out of nowhere, had a great year.
Yeah.
Eric Hosmer had a great year after a couple down years in San Diego. Will Myers had a career year. And Machado and Tatis, like even as great as they were, like I'd say they overachieved a little. Like Manny Machado with top 3 in the MVP. I don't know how many times that's going to happen, but so whereas when you look at the Dodgers, I'd say a lot of guys underachieved. When you look at Bellinger and Muncy and Jock, who's probably not on the team anymore, but he had a down year. So I think going into 2021, I'd say the Dodgers have a better offense. I'm not saying the Padres have a bad offense by any means. I think they're going to be good too, but I need to see those guys who had the breakout seasons. I need to see it replicated over a full 162 game season. Like at the end of the day, that was only 60 games that they did it. So who knows what would have happened if they played 100 more. We saw in the NLDS, Padres fans love to talk about how all the pitchers were hurt, but none of them bring up how Machado and Tatis did nothing at the plate. Trent Grisham didn't do a whole lot at the plate. So I just got to see those guys do it for a full 162 before I completely buy in and say they're on the same level as the Dodgers.
Yeah, and I mean, you could almost make the exact opposite argument for the Dodgers, is that Bellinger wasn't at his best. Muncy wasn't at his best, So, obviously Seager probably, an above average season for him, but Mookie Betts, you kind of are paying and expecting that. AJ Pollock was better. So kind of a mixed bag, but I mean, I wouldn't expect the Dodger offense to be worse. Obviously, Justin Turner, does he come back, is a big deal. And that was kind of the second question. So shout out to Dosan Sammy. He sent us this question in Spanish, so I'm grateful for the translate tool because it helped me out with this. But basically, how long are the Dodgers going to wait for Turner until there are no other options? Once you have to go through Suarez of the Reds, basically. So, I mean, we don't know the timeline for Justin Turner. I
Yeah.
would imagine it's getting closer and closer. He's a guy that you would hope would do the Dodgers a favor by just essentially making clear what his intentions are. That apparently hasn't happened. I haven't seen anybody connected with the Dodgers that has lost hope in that. I'll do a
Yeah.
small plug. I'm interviewing Pedro Mora of The Athletic on Wednesday, so this is the type of question I'll ask him, so stay tuned for that. But I haven't seen anybody like him losing confidence in the Dodgers signing Turner. Obviously, the longer it goes, there's there's more room for things to change, but it doesn't seem like there's been the shift to he's going to leave.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not exactly privy to what's going on in these negotiations. But if I had to guess, I'd say where we're at right now is the Dodgers have put out a 2-year offer to Justin Turner. He's kind of still shopping around, seeing if he could get 3 or 4 years, which is what he reportedly wants. And then if he won't, or if he can't get that, then he'll probably come back to the Dodgers and say, yeah, I'll take that offer. So this may go all the way up to the start of spring training. I don't know. I thought it would be done by now personally. I don't know what's they're waiting for, what's taking so long.
Yeah.
I don't see the Dodgers upping their offer above 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like if Justin Turner's holding out for the Dodgers to offer 3 years, I just don't see that happening. So I mean, we'll see if he gets that 3-year offer somewhere else. It'll be interesting to see if he takes that or if he takes the one less year to come back to the Dodgers, where obviously he loves. He's from LA, won the World Series, so we know he wants to be back with the Dodgers. We'll just see how important that third year is to him.
Yeah. Okay. 2 things to do before we go. I've got one more question for you, but first let me make this announcement. We've been raffling off a World Series DVD Blu-ray for the Dodgers, and so we're announcing Nicole Bartels is our YouTube winner. So congratulations to Nicole Bartels. Send us a message on Facebook, send us a message on Twitter, something like that. We appreciate you guys for entering that. We've got some more stuff to give away. We were going to give away some hats, but we had to press pause on that. So stay tuned. We still got 3 hats to give away. We just can't do it tonight. Thanks to those Andrew McDaniels asking and encouraging people to like the video. We appreciate it. The more you like it, the more people get to see this kind of thing, the more engagement we all get. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you've got the notification bell rung so that you can get our daily videos. Again, Jay Jaffe, I interviewed him from Fangraphs last week. That was a really fun conversation. I asked him, Sandy Koufax versus Clayton Kershaw, where he fell on that, what it's like to be a Hall of Fame voter, and then obviously talked about some 2021 Dodgers. This Wednesday, I'm interviewing Pedro Mora of The Athletic, about as plugged in a guy with the Dodgers as possible. So I'm really excited to chat with him. So stay tuned for that. But here's the last question. I don't know if you saw this article, but MLB.com had a piece up predicting which 40 active players would make the Hall of Fame. Now, they came up with that number because they said on average there are about 40 players playing at any given time that make the Hall of Fame. Did you see this article, Daniel?
No, I did not.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm curious. So I guess let me preface this with one question. Do you know who the last Los Angeles Dodger position player to go into the Hall of Fame as a Dodger? And this is a trivia question. If you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, feel free to answer. The last LA Dodger position player to go into the Hall of Fame as a Dodger.
I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. It's been a while. I know that.
Well, that's a correct answer because there are 0 Los Angeles Dodger position players in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. So there's only 3 LA Dodger pitchers who made the Hall of Fame. There have been some managers. The last non-manager was Don Sutton. Tommy Lasorda was actually the last Dodger to be inducted. I forgot that Piazza didn't go in as a Dodger, so that guy's a bum. Forget him. But yeah, that's crazy. I mean, Brooklyn Dodgers have 9 Hall of Famers, 5 position players, 2 managers, 2 pitchers, but no LA Dodger position players. So anyways, looking at the 40 that they projected, how many Dodgers do you think made the list of 40 current players to make the Hall of Fame?
I'll say 3.
Okay, they got 4.
4
Dodgers.
Wow.
So now who do you think they are?
Well, Kershaw and Mookie are 2 without question.
They're top 10.
The third in my mind was Bellinger.
Correct.
Just the start of his career has been insane, so I'd put him there. The 4th, is it Seager? I don't know if he's on that level. It's not.
Walker Buehler. Walker Buehler was number 4 on the list. So here's how they broke it down. This was super interesting to me. So they had it ranked. So Kershaw was 3rd. I could ask you one more trivia question. I'll throw it out there. Can you name the 2 players ahead of Kershaw? Basically, the 2, like number 1 being the most slam dunk player to make the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Mike Trout and Pujols probably.
Nailed it. So Kershaw's behind Pujols and Trout. Mookie Betts was 10th. So he was in a tier that's, quote, on the right path. So, Kershaw, Pujols, Trout, I mean, they're basically there. Like Kershaw could retire today, and he would make it. Mookie Betts is on the right path. He's checking every box along the way, but he's got to do this probably for another 5 to 10 more years.
Yeah.
Cody Bellinger, 23rd. He's in the sky is the limit tier. I thought this was interesting. The comp that they gave for Bellinger was Larry Walker. So, I mean, I remember Larry Walker just mashing for the Rockies. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. And then Walker Buehler was number 36. He was in the next generation tier that was kind of like, the guy's got to stay healthy. He has all the tools. He's kind of checked the first couple boxes. Long way to go, but he's there. So an interesting list. I mean, Seager would be the guy that I guess would be 5th on that list. Kenley Jansen had a really good career. You look at the guys that aren't going to get in this year. Kenley Jansen's not going to sniff. His name will pop up on the ballot. He might have a couple people vote for him, but he won't make a real dent there. So I thought it was a pretty straightforward list. I mean, David Price maybe as a guy that's had a nice career, but it's a nice career. It's not a Hall of Fame career. So nothing else really surprising me there. I mean, if you wanted to throw a dart, I mean, Will Smith is a guy I really like. He's really young. And if the trajectory keeps up, I mean, if I had to pick one person not on the list, Seager's probably first. And if you forced me to pick another one, it'd probably be Will Smith.
No, I agree on Will Smith. I was thinking about him too. If you look at the first 2 years of his career, for obviously the sample is very small, but for a catcher, it's hard to hit any better than that. So if he could keep that up for another decade, which obviously is a tall task, but hey, you never know.
Yeah, absolutely. So there you go. Some fun information. They've got 4 Dodgers potentially being in the Hall of Fame conversation. I mean, and all this to say, it's fascinating. Nobody is expected to get into the Hall of Fame this year. So it's not like they just vote these guys in every year. I think there's a crop of guys like A-Rod that are going to come onto the list next year who will surely be in there. But that's something to watch. There's one other thing. I don't know if you saw on Twitter. Somebody created a video graphic of the all-time home run leaderboard. I don't know if you saw this today. But if you haven't found it, it's somewhere. You can find it on my Twitter, @JeffSpiegel. But it was basically every year sort of tracking who the top 10 home run leaderboard. And so, it starts out like the leader's got like 30 home runs and then 80 home runs and climbing up. I mean, Babe Ruth, my respect after watching that for Babe Ruth, he was at 600 something and the second place guy was at 300. I mean, he was so much better than anybody else around him. And then it's constantly changing all the way up until like 1980. And then it basically stops. There's like barely any changes from 1980 to like 2000. Then obviously Bonds gets in there. And I didn't realize Pujols is 5th all time in home runs. So he keeps, I mean, that guy at his peak was unbelievable.
So good.
And he's still tacking him on. He's still, he's not going to catch anybody, but he's chipping away. So there you go. Well, hey, we appreciate you guys joining us as always. DodgerHeads Live here. It's been fun. Hopefully, this is our last week without news. Hopefully, in the next 7 days, there's something to report. We are getting closer to spring training. We're about a month away from spring training, which is crazy to say. So we appreciate you staying with us the offseason. And once baseball starts, it's only going to get better. So that's Daniel Starkin. I'm Jeff Spiegel. You can find him at @DStarkin on Twitter. I am at Jeff Spiegel on Twitter. We appreciate you. Check out DodgerBlue.com for all the latest Dodger Blue 1958 all over social media. And as we leave, as always, we're going to let our guy Vin send us home.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.